All right, everyone. Hello, and thanks for tuning in. We're doing this live on YouTube for the first time. If there's any technical glitches, well, that's what we're here to figure out, doing this for the first time. And hopefully everyone on Facebook can see this without too much lagginess and everything. So we're doing a Q&A with Lois Reisdorf. Good morning, Lois.
Hi, Aaron. It's nice to see you this morning.
You as well. You as well. It is a perfect day in Clearwater. I don't know what happened. It cooled off. It's a wonderful day. I can't wait to get back outside when we're finished up here. How is it over there?
Well, we are having rain in San Diego, so it's really great because we haven't had enough rain. So we're, quite cool and rainy.
Awesome. So we announced in the supporters of Lrh Facebook group a few days ago that we were going to be doing this Q&A, and they put in a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah.
And so I guess for this format, because normally when I do interviews with people, we'll do like a 2 or 3 hour chat. But for what we're doing today, maybe we stick to these questions and go off on any applicable tangents. But we won't try to do like a 3 hour interview at this time. But I'd love to do that another time if you're okay with it.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool. So you said that you have the questions in front of you. We're probably looking at the same list. Do you want to pick which questions to start with, or just take them sequentially?
Yeah, just wherever you think. So just hit me.
All right. Okay. And actually, for everyone watching who may not already know what we're doing right here, Lois and her family was featured in Scientology the Aftermath. Season 1, I think episode 7. Do you recall?
Yes, episode 7.
And the name of that episode was, I don't have it right in front of me here, but do you want to just give a brief explanation of what was covered in the show?
Well, we were about half of that show, and the main part of it was our son Brandon, who had left the church, and he had gotten himself into trouble by throwing a hammer through a window in the LA church. And so it was mainly about him, and it had been about him going through the introspection rundown prior to that, and just basically his problems that had happened from that. So there was just a little bit of a touch on what my history was, but both Gary and I, my husband, were born into Scientology and had been on the Apollo with Lrh. So that was just a minor point. So I'll just go straight into Brandon then, and he's doing really well. And hopefully this year we're going to have things completed for him in terms of his legal situation, but he's doing great. So we're really happy.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So let me just jump in with some questions. Everyone who watches Scientology probably knows Scientology's take on the subject of mental health and psychiatry and psychology. Psychiatry is the most evil thing in the world to a Scientologist.
Exactly.
And yet for those who are a danger to themselves or others, Scientology offers absolutely no solutions. I mean, they don't even pretend to offer a solution. I don't mean like their solutions don't work. They don't offer a solution for what they think should be done with people who are a danger to themselves or others.
Exactly. And that is what the problem is. And even though we had been like not involved with Scientology for so many years, and we had starting to have problems with him in his teen years, I could not get myself to take him to a psychiatrist or anyone in that. That was like the last thing absolutely in my mind that I could not get rid of. So, we tried Scientology and it didn't work, and we didn't do it on the main org lines. We did it sort of through different things. It started off with my stepfather giving me the assist handbook to run assists on him, and that's not auditing with an e-meter. That's like touch that wall and getting them into present time, and that really didn't help. And then I used my family in South Africa who were running a mission to assist me later, and that also didn't help. Things kept happening, and then he got himself onto the church lines, and joined staff at the San Diego org. And he was fine during that time period, but I knew that there wasn't anything that was going to help him anymore. Like, that was just, I think that's when I really realized that he needed to go to a psychiatrist. But it was a very hard decision. And especially when you're actually like born into Scientology and you were so involved, that it's the hardest thing to get rid of. Like, I really thought that I was committing the worst crime in the world. So, and they don't offer any solution. And in fact, if a person is psychotic and they try their first introspection rundown or whatever, and it still doesn't handle, they will not accept that person.
That's right.
And if the person's had a history of it, they also don't accept it. So it's kind of like, what is the point? If they have the solution to mental health, then they should prove it.
Right. How how do you feel about having made that decision now? How have you fully?
I'm so happy, so grateful. I feel that you know, I don't personally feel that they have all the answers either. So it's not a perfect solution, but it is the best solution in times of crisis. You know?
How does the reality of that experience, meaning how does the actual experience when you finally did take him to see a therapist and get a prescription or whatever, how did the actual situation relate to what you expected?
I was so fearful, so worried. I felt guilty. But then when I saw the results, I was like, wow, I wish I had done this like years prior. It was just amazing.
Had you even met a psychiatrist before taking your son?
No. Not that I know of. No, I had never.
Were you scared even just walking in what it was going to be like and what was going to happen?
Yeah, it was scary.
And so I'm just trying to imagine.
Well, the other thing is prior to this all blowing up, you know, with the incident, he had been on, you know, he'd been at staff at the San Diego org, and they were doing co-audits of the survival rundown. And that was when Gary and I really started getting a bit worried, because first of all, it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. Like, I had never heard of that kind of objective auditing ever been done like that. And I think between him and his, you know, co-person, they were doing it on each other, you know, they did over 1,000 hours. So and then he was telling us some of what the quote unquote objective processes were. And I had never heard of them. Like, seriously, I think they had been dug out of the 1950s lectures or whatever that Lrh had been doing, that were not even available for all these decades. And now they were being pulled out and being done on people, and they were just off the wall. And it was very worrying to me, especially knowing his history. It kind of like was going to just feed into it and just make it even more, which it did. And that is exactly what happened. And I feel it had a huge factor in what ended up happening, because he was in such a traumatic state when we got declared, and, you know, like what was going to happen. And he still felt like a Scientologist, and his brother had disconnected. It was really a traumatic experience. So coupled with all of that, it's no wonder, you know, what happened.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So you had already observed some instability in Brandon before he began this hundreds of hours of objectives auditing.
Yes. And you know, I actually was like, I just felt that this was really not going to be the right way to handle it.
Do you remember noticing any, was he obviously getting worse during the objectives auditing, per your observation?
Well, you know, it was kind of a little bit of a difficult situation, because even though he was living at home and he was on staff and we were going through our own thing, like having to go to LA and getting SEC checked, and the whole situation with not being able to talk to certain family members, and then Craig, our other son, who has disconnected from us, was not happy, and the older son was not involved. It was kind of like a really weird situation where we didn't want to talk to him and start interbulating him, which is like upsetting him about our feelings and how we really felt. You know what I mean? And then, but he would tell us sometimes about what was being done, and I didn't want to say, oh, I think that's crazy. I would say things like, gosh, I'd never heard of that before. That's amazing, you know, that whatever process they were doing. But he wasn't, no, he wasn't going, like, he was sort of stable during that time, but because we had this situation of both sides not really talking to each other, it was hard to gauge, really. It was more like as everything started falling apart that it just really erupted.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That is, for people watching who don't know what the objectives processes are or the survival rundown, they're very, very extremely repetitive auditing processes. What would be a basic example? What's this? The CCH 1 to 4. I can't even remember right now. Give me an example of an objective process, Lois.
It would sort of be like move that book off the chair or that bottle, you know, and you'd have to look at it. And
that's right. Okay, so let's use book and bottle. You mentioned book and bottle here. So it would be just to give people an idea of what an objectives auditing session might look like. You'd have two people standing next to each other. One person's holding a clipboard. They're the auditor. The other person's not holding anything. They are the person receiving the auditing. And the commands might be like, okay, do you see that table? I'm going to get these commands wrong, but this is just the idea. Do you see that table? Good, thank you. Walk over to that table. Thank you. And let's say there's a book on it. Do you see that book? Thank you. What is its color? What is its weight? What is its, you know, ask various questions about its dimensions. Good, pick it up. Thank you. Good, put it down. Thank you. Good, do you see that table? Yes, thank you. And let's say there's a bottle on that table. Good, walk over to that table. Good, pick it up. Good, what is its color? What is its weight? What is its whatever? And back and forth between these two tables, answering those same questions over and over and over again for hours, right?
Yep. It is. I mean, I did that, you know, when I was in the Sea Org as a young child, and had done like 40 hours of one of those processes. And it was so grueling that I just couldn't imagine having to do 1,000.
Right.
It was just overwhelming.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just overwhelming, you know. So
yeah. So if people get an idea of that kind of, and it is very common in objectives auditing, for the person receiving the auditing to have very unpleasant emotional reactions to doing the auditing, and that is considered just part of the process. That's considered something is the reaction is turning on, and you want to turn it off by continuing the auditing. And so one thing that's interesting about the objectives process is looking back on them after having left Scientology, is it puts the auditor in a frame of mind where he has full control over this pre-clear, and is not allowed to let the pre-clear leave the auditing session. And no matter what objections or non-optimal reactions are occurring in the auditing session, the auditor is taught to ignore it and just keep doing the auditing session. And although I never looked at it this way when I was in Scientology, being out, I've looked back on it and go, that is some crazy conditioning on both sides, on being conditioned that it's okay for someone to ignore all of your objections and reactions and keep making you do something against your will, and on the side that it's okay to do that to others.
Right. Yeah. it really is crazy. So anyway, he's doing well, and really well, and that is the most important thing. And Gary and I are just so grateful about that,
That's great.
to have saved him.
That's great. So it's just the two sons, or do you have other children?
I have three sons. So the oldest son is Brett, and he's the oldest. He is the one who has never had anything to do with Scientology. He's married with 2 kids and lives here in San Diego and doing great. So it was very traumatic for him and his wife, Jessie, as well, who also had Scientology parents, but we didn't even know about that. It was the weirdest thing. They met just accidentally, and it just happened to be that both their parents were kind of off the Scientology lines, but had been Scientologists. So for them, it was really, really hard because they were seeing what was happening, and they could see the stress of what Gary and I were going through trying to save Craig and Brandon. So for all of us, we went through a few years of just craziness. And that's who our ethics officer, who was dealing with us, eventually was trying to get us to disconnect from Brett.
From your non-Scientologist son.
Right. So, and I kept saying, like, how can you tell a non-Scientologist? And they kept saying, well, you've got to handle him. You've got to give him the truth about Scientology and get him to realize that what you want to do is the best thing. But meanwhile, he had read the book Going Clear. He had already been online, which we didn't even know at the time, but he had. And so there was no way that he was going to be handled, And I think, and that's,
Julian, I'm sorry.
Pardon?
Was it Julian who Julian Schwartz was your ethics officer?
No.
Okay, just checking.
It was a female. Lindy. Her name was Lindy.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't remember that one. Oh, this was the ethics officer at AOLA?
Yes.
What year?
So this was between 2012 through 2015.
Oh, I was long gone. That explains it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's tackle some of these questions that are here. Okay, Andrea Garner asks, Lois, you and Gary have been married for a long time. Would you say your shared experience of Scientology made you stronger as a couple? And if so, congratulations on bucking the trend within Scientology, an organization that practically promotes marrying quickly and separating easily.
Right. So this was an interesting question because definitely people who have gotten married in the Sea Org don't have a good record of staying married. So we were married for almost 7 years in the Sea Org. And at the time when we were in the Sea Org, it was not a common practice to force people to get divorced like what I've read about that happened afterwards. That was definitely not something that was done. Sometimes they were separated, like one spouse was sent on a mission, and that could maybe take a long time. Like I had been on mission for 6 months at one point. But when you are married in the Sea Org, your life is not normal. So there were often times that Gary and I were on different schedules. We didn't cook for ourselves. We didn't do anything for ourselves other than maybe doing our own laundry. But I even had people do that for me because I was a messenger, so I was lucky. But we were very much in love with each other and really depended on each other during that time period. And I think when we left the Sea Org, that's where I think sometimes the separation could happen, because you don't really know how your partner, if the partner is going to be able to make money, or how things are going to happen. And we just, it worked out well for us. We worked out our roles, and I had Brett within 18 months of leaving the Sea Org, so I went straight into being a mom, and we've just persevered. I mean, I really believe that we are each other's soulmates. And it hasn't always been, you know, perfect, but we've made it work, and we are each other's cheerleaders, really.
How many years have you guys been married now?
41.
41 years. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what's the next question here? Did you see in David Miscavige's personality that he was capable of taking over and making Scientology into what it is today?
Okay, so I knew him right from the beginning, and in fact, I had recruited him for the Commodore's Messenger Org. So he had joined the Sea Org in Clearwater, and if it wasn't me who would have recruited him, someone else would have. So it's not like I personally, it was just that we were at, you know, it was my job at the time to do that. And he actually is the same age as me. So we were both young at the time, but I'd already been a seasoned Sea Org member. And I recruited him, and he seemed like he had all the qualities for as a messenger. And I didn't see any indication of what he ended up coming at that time. He was spunky. He, you know, he was really dedicated. He wanted to do it. So, and in fact, I, you know, honestly have to say that we were friends for quite a long time. But it wasn't until maybe the last year or so that there were indications of what was to come, and things that were really shocking to me at the time. That, you know, his swearing, I mean, we all swore to a certain extent, but it was just disgusting. And it's really when he took control of getting rid of Mary Sue Hubbard, who's Lrh Hubbard's wife, and sorting out the Guardian's office when things started showing up. He definitely had a little bit of an edge to him. Like when I look back now, I see those subtle indications that were there. But I certainly didn't experience what people experienced later.
As far as the degree of violence and outbursts?
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, he started that like right before. He had actually pushed Gail, my sister-in-law, who was the top at the time, and pushed her into a file cabinet. And I heard about, sorry, I heard about the telephone booth with the crowbar when she was trying to get to Pat Broker. Anyway, that's a different story, but that was happening like within a month or two before we were kicked to the curb.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, Scientologists have the idea that Miscavige was personally selected and groomed as the next leader of Scientology. And how does that compare with your experience?
No, definitely not. So I was thinking about this last night, and then I had written my blogs about a year ago on Mike Rinder's blog, and I'd put the timeline together. So he arrived in 1977 to where we were in La Quinta, California, which is where Lrh had been. But at the time when he arrived, Lrh had gone because the raid by the FBI in LA had happened, and he disappeared for 6 months. So Dave kind of arrived during that time period. Then in 1978, when he came back, which was the beginning of 78, he started doing the films. And Dave was considered like a junior messenger, so he wasn't put in main positions as a messenger at that time.
Can you define for the people watching what you mean by messenger?
Okay, so on the Apollo, when I first became a messenger to Lrh, we were all young, and we did little running around duties for Lrh Hubbard. like hold his ashtray, light his cigarette, move papers when he's at his desk. And then we would run messages around the ship to like the chief engineer or whoever. And we would deliver the message, get the message from the person and deliver it back. There were things where we helped him go to bed, get up in the morning. If he was going to be auditing himself, we would set up the room for him. That was our duties. When we came to the US off the ship, we started doing things like more secretarial work where we actually took dictation. We started typing, those kind of things, helping send telexes with codes and all that, plus still doing those other duties that we always did. So it was kind of like a natural progression that we eventually got involved with management because he really did trust us. So that's really what a messenger was.
And so even at that time, were messengers, was the status of a messenger considered to be a very senior status the way it is today in the Sea Org?
Yes, it absolutely. I mean, I've heard now that this RTC, which didn't exist when I was there, is higher than the CMO. But at that time, we didn't have that group. So the CMO was definitely the highest.
Right. That's what I wanted to make sure people understood, because when you just when someone just tries to describe what a messenger is and what it means, it sounds like it could be understood to just be, like you said, a secretary or a messenger or some low-level clerical position. But the status of messenger also gave one essentially, you were acting on behalf of LRH. People had to treat you the way they would treat LRH. It was a very senior position and is to still today. Just wanted to make sure people understood that.
Yeah.
So what were we talking about? What did I ask? Oh, that Scientologists have this idea that Miscavige was personally selected, but
So,
what was the actual truth?
Yeah, so his FaceTime with LRH was very limited because when LRH came back and he started making movies, then Dave got himself onto the cameraman position. And then sometime in 78, I believe it's when he had his heart attack, and then he wasn't around that much. And we didn't allow the younger, newer messengers to be near LRH during that time. So he got involved with a lot of handling the traffic, which was the mail and the telexes that would come into LRH, and a messenger would sit in the office next to his office and sort it out in order of priority, or if something wasn't necessarily going to go into him. And he got himself into that position. So, and then by early 1980, he disappeared again forever. And prior to that, during 79, we had formed the Watchdog Committee. By that time, we were in LA for 6 months. And then some of us on Watchdog Committee would still stand watch with LRH, who was in Hemet. But as far as I remember, Dave didn't do that. So he didn't have much FaceTime with LRH at all. And I think when my two sister-in-laws who were running things and myself, we were like the first people to get busted and declared in the 80s. And then Dave and a bunch of people took over, and some of them had never even met LRH, which was, it was just like the most shocking thing to us at the time. I mean, when I look back at it, I think, oh my God, like they quote unquote are in the CMO, but they had never met him. They had never had any FaceTime with him. And now these guys are taking over everything. It was a very devastating and shocking thing for the three of us when that all happened.
How did these junior messengers, and in that statement, I'm including Miscavige, have the clout or authority or ability to get compliance to pull off kicking out a bunch of people from the CMO who had many more years experience on the job, many more years working with LRH? How did he pull that off?
Well, I think what happened was because he was put on the project to handle the geo, he was going directly to Lrh via Pat Broker. So Watchdog Committee, which was Gail, Dee Dee, myself, a lot of other people that were involved, Mark Yeager, all those people, we weren't to be distracted by that situation going on. We just had to do the management of Scientology. So it was kind of a situation, but now Dave, because he hadn't been a senior messenger, he hadn't done a lot of FaceTime with Lrh, he truly didn't know how to deal with him. And if you read Janice Gillum Grady's book, Commodore's Messenger, she really describes, and maybe it's coming in the next book actually, how we were very good at keeping things from him, not important things, but like toning down a situation so that he wouldn't fly off the handle. We were like crisis control experts. And I found that having that training has really helped me with my real estate job. Because if you're in real estate, you just can't believe the crazy clients or the crazy situations that happen. And I'm very calm under pressure. So we all had that ability to calm things down for him and to mitigate the seriousness of the situation. Even if it wasn't really a serious situation, you would know that he would just blow up about it. And we also would like talk to the people who we were running messages to. Now I'm talking about on the ship days. Like, you don't really want to give that answer, like, come on, give me something better than that. So he didn't have that training. And the FaceTime that he did have with Lrh was when he was the worst that I'd ever seen him, from 78 onwards. He really was not in good shape mentally or physically. And so he had this line, and Pat Broker wasn't trained in that either. So he had this straight line to Lrh and was just telling him all this shit. So he could say whatever he wanted. And there's Lrh with no other people around to say, hey, maybe we should check this and maybe we should do an investigation. But instead, it was this direct flow going to Lrh saying, they're doing this and they're doing that. And apparently part of the problem with us three was that we didn't want Mary Sue to be crucified by the church. We wanted her to be handled carefully and with empathy, as opposed to crucifying her the way he did. Today, people don't even talk about her. So this line was going straight to him. If he had still been in Hemet at the time, because we knew where he was, we would have gotten in a car and gone there and sorted it out. But we didn't know where he was. And that's truly how he managed to he thought Dave was just this amazing person who was giving him the truth that was, and the Guardian's office was in big shit at the time. So he just thought he was a hero, I believe. But at the same time, there's no way, and it hasn't been proven in writing that he gave him the mantle. So.
Right. What was your? I think we're having a bit of a technical problem right now. That's fine. Keep going. Did you have any understanding of what was supposed to happen after Lrh died, whether Annie Broker was really supposed to take over with Pat, or what the deal was supposed to be?
No, as far as from what I understood at the time, was that was what the Watchdog Committee was for, was to take over. he was very against like another individual being the main person. And I think that's why he wanted Watchdog Committee to be confidential, that people didn't know who was in it. And we even had to learn the Robert's Rules of
Orders? Is it Robert's Rules of Order?
Yeah, something like that. And we had to study that, and we, had to have voting. And I don't think that exists today at all.
I hadn't thought of what you just mentioned, which is that of course he would never have expected himself to be replaced with one person, because when he moved off of the executive director international role, he made a very grand display of the fact that it took 12 people to replace him.
Right.
Right? He in his writings, he was like, oh, I had to turn over all of my hats, and it took 12 people, the International Management Executive Committee, to replace him as the Executive Director International. So it makes sense that the Watchdog Committee would have served that same purpose.
Right. And the other thing was David Mayo, you see. And in fact, we called his unit RTC at the time. But so for 30 years, I've been confused about that. I never knew when people would talk about RTC, I always thought it was the tech compilations as senior CSN. So he was supposed to handle all the side of Watchdog Committee. So it was the two sides.
I think it was a lag, Lois. He was supposed to handle what?
The technical side of Scientology, the writings, and the actual auditing bridge side of it, and Watchdog Committee would handle the management.
Got it. So Mayo wasn't a part of the Watchdog Committee. Watchdog Committee was to handle the admin. David Mayo was going to handle the tech.
Right, and they would run alongside of each other.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how the acronyms were used back then, but when I was in, which was during the era of David Miscavige's RTC existing, we called that branch in the senior CSN office RTRC.
Yeah, and I think that was changed after I left. Because we called it RTC, Research Technical Compilations, is what I believe it stood for.
Interesting.
And well, it was funny because when we were going through our thing, Craig and Brandon would tell us, Gary and I, well, we've got to write to RTC about this, and because they are the ones who will sort this out, this injustice and everything else. And I kept saying, what do you mean RTC? They're just there to do the technical comps. It wasn't until later that I figured out, oh my gosh, these guys were hardcore.
What was the question I was just going to ask you? Okay, so at the time when Miscavige did oust all of these people, he was doing it with orders he had manipulated Lrh into giving. He was turning Lrh against the other people who had known him the most. Is that correct?
I totally believe that is what happened. He was giving him false information because we knew that if we were able to get in touch with him, we could have sorted it out. And it was, yeah.
There's so many things that the more time I spend outside of Scientology, I look back on it and go, why didn't I ask that question? Or why wasn't the answer to this question more important to me at the time? And I'm wondering if you had something like that on this subject. Do you ever look back and go, how, given everything we all believed about Lrh Hubbard, but you were close to him and knew him, considering everything that was believed to be true about Lrh Hubbard, do you ever look back and go, how could he have allowed himself, or how could he have been so susceptible to being so obviously manipulated against those he knew and trusted the most by someone he didn't know and trust very much? Do you ever look back on that, or did you at the time look, go, how is this happening?
I mean, even at the time when it happened, it was so devastating. I mean, now I look back and I think it's the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time when it was happening, it was it was so devastating to me. And that was the thing. It was like, how could he think that of me? You know, like how, when we had this great relationship. But then now that I've read all the different books and I've read about his early life, and thought about things that I hadn't maybe noticed before, I realized that that was a pattern that he had. I mean, he did that to Mary Sue, his own wife. He
Did
believed
what exactly?
he did that to Mary Sue, his own wife.
Did what exactly?
Discarded her.
Oh, right.
Believed everything about her, that she was an SP, basically.
Really? I didn't know. I didn't know he had come to feel that way about Mary Sue.
Well, from what I understand, that is basically what happened. But I remember the last time he saw her, and he was going to meet with her. They hadn't been seen, you know, they were separated in terms of location and everything. And I remember him being very nervous. Like, I don't think he could have personally done it. It needed to be someone like David Miscavige.
Incredible.
Yeah.
All right. What is the next question? Oh, we got a whole bunch from Andrea Garner. Thank you, Andrea.
I know, she's great.
Lois and Gary, it's heartbreaking that your son Craig has chosen to remain in Scientology and disconnect from you. The website you and the family have set up as a means of communicating with Craig is a beautiful love letter to your son. Do you foresee a time when he will begin to shake off the conditioning and reach out to you?
Well, that's a very hard question to answer because I don't know. However, I'm a very optimistic person, so I feel that there will come a time when that will happen. Because prior to him becoming involved in Scientology, he had heard stories that we had talked about in terms of David Miscavige and how it all happened. And really, at that time, we were saying how he was changing the tech and everything. So he knows. And that's the thing that I'm hoping, is that he has that information in his head, that one of these days he's going to experience something and go, oh my gosh, my mom and dad were right. And he's the one who's made this decision. He's an adult. And all I can do is just put that love out there for him and somehow get that message out. Because if he Googles his name, it's the top thing that comes up.
Oh, is
So,
that right?
yeah.
And this is a blog that you have dedicated to him?
Yep. So he knows that it exists. It's been texted to him, and that's through anonymous texting. He knows it exists, and you know, you just think, for us, we're all here and we talk about him and our life and his life when he was growing up, but now he can't talk about all of that to anybody, really. Like, how is he going to say, yeah, you know, when I lived in South Africa, we used to go camping in the game reserve, and my dad and mom would do this, or we would, you know, we were surrounded by a herd of elephants in our 4x4. And, you know, how does he get through life without relating those stories? Because he can't really.
Yeah.
And
Wild.
and I really think that it's going to eat at him.
Yeah. It's it's so hard because on the one hand, with all of the information that's already out there, you know, in things like the aftermath and the entire internet, it's easy to go, well, with all that information being readily available, anyone who's in Scientology is in Scientology despite all that. So what the hell could possibly get them out? It's so easy to go, if they were going to leave, they'd already have left. But on the other hand, that's what someone would have said about Mike Rinder 10 years ago. Do you know? There's so many people who have left at prior to them actually doing it. Nobody would have ever dreamed that they would have left. That it's so hard to say what will be the breaking point for any one person.
Exactly. And I'm just really thankful that he's not in the Sea Org. He's in the normal world, even though he works for a Scientology company. And then he also works in the org, I believe, I have no information in the past year, at the Orange County organization or church. And then he has a day job. So he is out there, you know, in the normal world. And I really don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just sending good vibes.
That's about what you can do.
Yeah.
How often do you guys do blog entries?
Well, I just did one a few days ago, and the previous one had been January 1st for the new year, and that was most probably the longest gap that I had done, which I felt bad about, but want to do it at least once a month.
Cool, that's great. Andre asks, Lois, how is Brandon getting on? I know he has not been well recently. Please send him our love.
Yeah, he's doing great, and I will send him everybody's love.
Andrea says, what would you say to Hubbard that you wish you had been able to say to him when he was alive? What would you say to David Miscavige if you were alone with him for 5 minutes?
I don't know what I would say to Lrh. I would just, if I had the sense at the time would have been for all of us to come up with a plan on really like how was he going to turn over Scientology, because he was not in physically good shape, and there's no way that he was going to, I was actually surprised that he lasted until 86. But I would have, obviously, if we had been able to, we would have, Gail, Dee and I would have gone over to him if he was still living in Hemet, and would have told him the truth of what was going on. And, but at the same time now, I'm glad that didn't happen, because I'm glad that I have the life that I have. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. To David Miscavige, I won't even tell you what I would say to him. It's just
What is the single biggest thing, if you can isolate one thing, that you now know is true, or that you now believe, that you didn't before? Like, we take the time when you were with Lrh, working with Lrh, in Scientology, running Scientology, and now, what's the biggest thing you learned that was like, what?
Wow, it's actually been such a process, because even though I hadn't personally been involved with Scientology from the time I left until I think it was 2012, 2011, I hadn't gone into an org, I hadn't gone to any events, but I kind of kept up on things through my family. But I personally still considered myself a Scientologist. But at the same time, I didn't have this desire to go do anything. I was also terrified of getting my kids involved, because I didn't want them to join the Sea Org. So it was kind of a weird situation. I think the biggest thing that I realized is that I believe that Lrh was mentally ill. He, now having experienced it and studying up on it, like reading about it, I really do believe that was like the biggest eye-opener for me. I think also reading about his early life, like in Barefaced Messiah, and those books were just unbelievable to me. But then things kind of made sense, you know, of what I had experienced when he was much older.
So it was mostly reading about his earlier life that you hadn't previously known about that changed your perception of him?
Yeah. I do believe that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you nodding? If
yeah, sorry,
the
I
video
was
is set
nodding,
up,
yes.
if you don't speak, the camera stays on me. Was there anything you have seen, anything written about LRH that you've read, or anything anyone said about LRH that you've heard that that caused you to learn something about him that you didn't already know, but not in reference to his previous life, in reference to something? Do you feel like you've learned anything about LRH you didn't know about the regarding the time that you spent with him?
No. No.
Okay. And so what about what information from his early life caused you to change your perception of him?
Just that, you know, the stuff involved with the Parsons guy and the magic that he got involved with, and then this how he started up. He wrote Dianetics, and then he started his foundation, and it ended up being taken over, and also like the drug use, and I think, yeah, that kind of stuff like really got to me. And then the treatment of his second wife, who he supposedly didn't have, that stuff was just like shocking to me. But then at the same time, it going through the suicide of his son Quentin and how he, you know, just basically was furious about that. It didn't really affect him. And so now when I look back, I'm thinking, wow, you know.
So after all the time that you personally spent with LRH, did you know about wife number 2 before Mary Sue?
Never, 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 never.
Really?
Nope.
Did you know about a wife number 1? Did you?
Yes, yes. I knew that he had been married before, and I knew about Nibs. His oldest son was from that wife, and that there had been a daughter. But by the time I got involved, Nibs was already gone, like out of the scene. And I was kind of surprised when I read that Nibs came back onto the scene in the early 80s with a lawsuit, you know, thinking Lrh had died already. Because I just didn't ever hear about him. So that was all I knew. I had no idea that there had been a second wife or another daughter.
When you were in the Sea Org with LRH, were you aware he was worth several $100 million at that time?
No, no.
Do you think if you had known that, that would have changed anything for you?
No, because as far as I was concerned, all the making of the money was for the church.
Right.
His focus was the money was for the church. Well, the organization. He personally was not a very spend money type of person. He's like to me he's like the complete opposite to David Miscavige in that regard.
Right. But I guess what I mean is like, would you have questioned why the conditions on the ship had to be as poor as I've heard as I've heard the conditions were, and why every week had to be an urgent money quota Thursday before 2? Why did everything have to be so urgent? If there was tens and hundreds of millions of dollars lying around?
For our understanding, it was for the running of the Sea Org, the Apollo and all the Sea Org bases.
But that's my point, though. Like, there wasn't a lot of money to go around, though, right? Like, I understand that the money Scientology was making, all the Sea Org members, you know, believe that money is for the operation of Scientology. But there didn't seem to be a lot of money to go around. Am I right?
Right. Plus, it was very important to have reserves, Sea Org reserves, which was a big thing for him. And I think in regards to a lot of the legal stuff that was going on for
Sure.
you know, making so that it would continue.
Right.
And I believe the other thing was that they weren't paying taxes in the US, and there was what eventually ended up happening in 93 was that they were going to be owing all these billions of dollars, which they didn't have. So it was building up to that was in fact could happen. There was that fear that could happen, and he was really, really zoned in on that.
I got it. So even if you had become aware that there was like 100 mil in a bank account, it probably would have just been chalked up as disaster insurance or something.
Right, right.
I get it. I get it. All right. Tiffany Purdy asks, do you think Hubbard truly believed in his own work? And what about Miscavige?
I definitely believe Lrh believed in his own work. Whether it was delusional or whatever, who knows? But the point is that he was focused on the technology of Scientology and the management, but he put a lot of attention on making auditors, whereas David Miscavige, I personally don't think he believes it and is focused on the whole new orgs with their new buildings and everything, which was never a focus of Lrh's.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, that's interesting what you said about his focus on making auditors. Because I had always been focused on, like when people ask this question, did Hubbard believe his own bullshit? I've always said that I thought the evidence that he did was the fact that he continued to audit himself almost right up until the day that he died.
Exactly.
You don't audit yourself if you don't believe in it.
Right.
But I've never mentioned or thought about the idea that he did put a strong emphasis on how important it was to train auditors, which is just like if you don't believe in Scientology, then you're not trying to get tons of auditors out in the world delivering auditing. And Miscavige has actually done the complete opposite.
Yeah.
Two times since 1996, he's canceled all auditor certificates of anyone that had been trained up to that time.
Well, the Saint Hill special briefing course, when I found out when I went to LA that it was not even being delivered, I was shocked. It was just, to me, that was the evidence to me. Even if I hadn't completely gotten out of the whole Scientology thing, to me, that was the evidence that David Miscavige was definitely, absolutely screwed things up.
Right. Interesting. You know, I've heard several people say recently that the St. Hill special briefing course has been canceled, and it might be just playing around with words. I don't believe that it has been. Can you explain what you're talking about?
Well, apparently it is no longer delivered. So
sure,
so
but how did you learn that? You said that when you went to LA, you learned that. How did you learn that?
Yeah, somebody told me, a staff member.
I get it. So do you remember in 1996 when the first golden age of tech came out? It ended up in the Class 8 course room at the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles being closed for many years. And do you remember why? Like, do you know what I'm talking about?
No, at that time I was not involved at all. I was still in South Africa, and I remember my mom, my stepfather was a Lrh trained Class 8 auditor from the ship, and she came to me and said how with this whole golden age of Tech 1, I guess, and I didn't really understand what the hell they were doing, and I wasn't particularly interested either, but she did tell me that my dad had to rethread everything. He had to start all the way at the bottom, and I just thought that is the most ridiculous thing. And the funny thing is that he was the most highly tech trained person in the whole of South Africa, and even though they were running this little mission, he was still CSing folders for the org. So now what was going to happen, like seriously, and he never did it. He died in 2007, and till the day he died, he never went and did that.
Right. Yeah.
And he continued,
so like you said,
yes, he continued to CS define
that's right.
orders.
So in order for the Class 8 course room to even have a purpose, there has to be people available and qualified to do the Class 8 course. But when Miscavige released the first Golden Age of Tech in '96, as you just said, all the auditors who had ever been trained ever, regardless of if they've already been auditing for 30,000 hours and are still auditing, had to start from the bottom on their training.
I know.
And the only way they were allowed to continue auditing anybody was as long as they were in progress on their new training. But that's why the Class 8 course room closed. But I'm splitting hairs a little bit. If at that time someone had said the Class 8 course has been canceled, I would go, no, that's not true. There's just nobody eligible to be on the course right now because they're all retraining from the bottom. And that's kind of what's happened with the St. Hill Special Briefing course. Well, first of all, Miscavige released another Golden Age of Tech 2 that, again, all the auditors, even those who had done the first Golden Age of Tech that Miscavige released, all those auditors had to start over again.
Yeah, it was just insane.
And so people who are on the St. Hill Special Briefing course, because that course lasts so long and there's 26, it's either 16 or 26 courses, people use the St. Hill Special Briefing course and the fact that they're in the middle of it. They use it as an excuse not to do these new courses that Miscavige releases. And so basically, he released every book is now its own course. Every lecture set is now its own course.
Right.
And so he releases the second Golden Age of Tech. Everybody has to go back to the bottom. And so there might not be anybody on the St. Hill Special Briefing course. There may not be a Class 6 course room. But it's because he's made everyone go back to the bottom and considers there's nobody eligible to be on it.
The thing is that you see LRH would do things like, okay, we're going to disband the RPF, which is the Rehabilitation Project Force, and we're going to put all those people and train them as auditors. He would do things like that, but give them like really quick timelines. Like you had to be in the chair within a short amount of time. That's how important or urgency that he put on making auditors compared to what he would freak out if he knew that the St. Hill Special Briefing, no one was on the St. Hill Special Briefing course. Absolutely, I cannot even tell you how he would freak out.
Right. So, I think I got us on this tangent. Basically, do you think Lrh really believed his own information? Did you ever observe or witness anything that would make you doubt that in retrospect? Like, did you see anything happen that you can recall where you're like, if he really believed everything he was saying, he wouldn't have done that, or anything like that?
No. I don't think I saw anything. I mean, other than the fact that the workability of it, with his mental state and his physical state, sure. But him not believing it, definitely not.
Right. There's a famous quote that gets repeated, attributed to Lrh, of if you want to make real money, start a religion. And he said that to one of his old science fiction contacts. I think it was one of his old publishers. And that quote is used as evidence that Lrh always intended it to be a money-making scam. How do you process that? Do you believe the quote? Do you care about the quote?
No, I don't care about the quote. It could be something he could say. I mean, I could see him saying that, but it doesn't take away from the importance that he put on it.
Right. I get it. Does the fact that you are able to look at his mental decline, what's my actual question on this? So a combination of...
Okay, you just died on me.
Two things. This magical state of full OT is supposed to be like. Did I just freeze for you?
Yeah, you did.
All right. I'll restart the question. If you take these two facts into consideration, one, that you did see his mental decline at the end of his life, compared to what everyone's supposed to believe about this magical state of OT in Scientology, and the things that you've learned about his early life, does that information change the degree to which you think Lrh believed everything he said and wrote?
I feel as though I absolutely think that he believed everything he wrote. I mean, it doesn't change my mind on that.
Yeah, okay. I'm not trying to change your mind, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I mean, my experience in just reading and listening to everything that exists that in the body of Scientology, not that I've read or listened to all of it, it's hard to spend that much time in Scientology and conclude he was just doing it to make money. But it's not impossible, because I know many people who do feel that way.
And the thing is that he was on such a mission personally. Like, he was like a workaholic to me.
Right.
You know, he didn't stop. And in the blog that I wrote, I remember this one time where I suggested he take a holiday because he was, getting run down, and he just got furious at me, like, we can't stop, I have to keep going. It was, there's no way that he was not on a mission.
Right. I've often wondered if, because when you
Okay,
do look at Hubbard's or see some of the private, did I just freeze?
Yeah.
Okay. When you do read about Hubbard's early life, you see that he did have a tendency to be kind of a fraudster, like a huckster, and he was always, if not outright lying, just greatly exaggerating. And you look at Dianetics, and you look at all of the claims he made in Dianetics that at the time I'm sure were very electrifying to people, but now just looks silly. You read the book and it's just silly. It's so obvious bullshit.
But this is where I think the mental illness part comes in, is that he was delusional and really believed it.
Yep. That's where I was kind of going with that, is like, is it possible that even in the beginning, if he knew what he was writing in Dianetics was bullshit, whether he's like, and I've put some thought into this and go, okay, what if he truly believed it, but he thought he had to exaggerate it to get people to buy it? Like, I've tried to make it make sense in many different ways, but it does seem possible that even if he was, if there was a fraud aspect to it in the beginning, he definitely bought into his own bullshit.
Yes.
As it moved on. There doesn't seem to be any doubt to me. That's how you feel as well?
Yeah, totally. And also getting the feedback from the people and how it was making sense to them, and all these wins, it just egged him on even more.
Right. Okay, next question. Did you prefer Scientology before or after Lrh died? This is from Kristen Halloran.
Well, definitely before.
Yeah.
There's no.
When you left Scientology, okay, so there was a period of decades where you weren't really associated with the Church of Scientology at all, but you still considered yourself a Scientologist.
Yeah, and that's why I think I have a really good perspective on this, because I didn't go through the slow progression of change and weird things happening and blah 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 blah. I was like there and then not, and then almost 3 decades later thrown into it, and absolutely was aghast.
Okay, so because for this 20 or 30-year period, were you like a declared SP during this time, or had you just drifted away?
No, I had been, and then I got, I did my A to E steps in the early 80s, and I was in good standing. And I think because I was in South Africa, which was away from the main things going on, and we kept a low profile, and my parents, thankfully, just never pressured me to have to get involved. They tried every now and again to get me to go to an event, and I think I went to one, but they just didn't push me. And so we just stayed off the lines,
Right. So when you eventually, and I don't remember all of the details and the sequence in which they happened, but when you were officially no longer good member in good standing of the Church of Scientology. Did you ever do independent Scientology, or did you just like, okay, we're done, we're done?
No, I've never done any independent Scientology.
Okay. Okay, so the next question here is from Sid Whittle. In your write-up for Mike Rinder, okay, so you did a series of posts on Mike Rinder's blog about your history. In your write-up for Mike Rinder, you mentioned that your mom told you that the planet was going to blow up in 5 years if it was not cleared. What was your reaction 5 years later when nothing happened? Or was there an explanation given to you at the time that made sense? Or did you just forget about that being so busy with your own duties?
Yeah, so I was about, it must have been 7 or 8 when I was told that. So it was like 1967, 68. And it was something that Lrh had written and sent down to the orgs and the Scientologists. And I didn't know specifically, you know, I hadn't read the issue that he wrote. It was just because I was little. So my mom told me. And she was trying to explain to me why I had to take on more responsibilities in the family. She had a lot of kids, but at that time we had 5. They had 5 kids, and I was the oldest. So by the time 5 years was up, I was already in the Sea Org, I think. Yeah, I was already in the Sea Org. And if I had thought about it, I would have thought to myself, well, it's because we're making a difference. Like what we're doing is making a difference. So that's how I would have justified that.
That's easy enough. Okay, Audra Hedger asks, during your time with Lrh, did he refer to Scientology as a religion? And if not, was it thought of as a lifestyle, a product, a theory?
Definitely not a religion.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Really?
There was never any, you know, to me, that whole religious aspect was definitely to do with the taxes and to not have to pay taxes. So, but there was never any mention about religion or God or anything like that by him. Okay, you froze.
Right. Yeah. Mike Rinder and I did a series of interviews, and we talked about our own experience with whether we felt it was possible to believe in a single almighty God and be in Scientology. What's your opinion on it?
Okay, so in terms of my own opinion,
let me ask the question again in case it got all weird. Oh, could you hear the question okay?
You were basically asking what I believed in terms of God. And
do you believe that it is possible, based on your experience and things you were taught while in the Sea Org, was it for you possible to grow up in Scientology, spend all that time in the Sea Org, and have a belief in a single, all-powerful God?
No, I never thought that ever.
Right. Were you specifically told it would be false to believe in a almighty God?
I don't think that anybody specifically said that to me. I think it's just what I thought. And especially when you
right. Do you know of
sorry.
No, I think our lag is getting a little worse as the live stream goes on. I keep running over you by accident. Do you think, based on what you know of Scientology and the beliefs of Scientology, that it is compatible with a belief in an all-powerful supreme being?
No, I don't believe that at all.
Right. Okay, good. Just checking. All right. So, well, if you guys, if on this ship with Lrh, nobody thought of Scientology as a religion or treated it as such, what would you say people thought of it as?
Gosh, I don't know. It's kind of like a crusade, or we were just this amazing group of people and we were going to just get rid of people's banks and make them clear. It's hard to think of. Like, I didn't really sit down and think of this big epiphany of what we were doing. It was just something that was inbred in me.
Would you, it was thought of as a movement?
Yeah, I think more of a movement or a helping self, which is really, to me, that's why a Scientologist believing in God can't really do both, because the whole thing about Scientology is you, right? So you're responsible for everything. You've got to handle all this that's stopping you or causing you all your problems in life, or your emotions, whatever your problems, it's you. So I don't think it's possible. Like, I have friends who are Catholics who are very heavy Catholics, and they attribute all their good stuff in their life to God. And it's not like, yeah, I did this, so I don't see how those two things can jive together.
Right. Well, I certainly agree with that. All right, let's see. I admire your perseverance in writing to your son on your blog. Does it help you to cope with the continued disconnection?
Yes, and this was something that I thought I would mention, is that the whole time that I was out of the church prior to everything hitting the fan, I kept everything a secret from my friends. I never talked about it. This is the thing, is that I still believed in Lrh so much during that time that I didn't even tell my parents really what happened, on why I got declared. I felt as though I had this duty to him to never divulge things about him, like that he was sick. He had, rages at times. And so I never said anything. And when all of this happened, it was the best therapy for me to sit down and write that blog that I wrote on Mike Rinder's blog, the posts that I made, because it was just so therapeutic that I was finally getting this out. And it helped me to deal with the whole thing with Craig, because we had told him stories through his life, and he had written up these knowledge reports, which I still have pages of them, where he got things wrong. Like, the stories that we told him, he didn't get it the right way that I had told him, because he was young, he was a kid. So it was just therapeutic getting the record straight on that, and everything that I had been keeping quiet for all these years. It just was amazing.
That's great. You mentioned this intense loyalty that you had to Lrh even after leaving the Sea Org, and I wonder, and that's a reflection of how much time you spent with him and how well you felt you knew him. When you hear people talking about
okay, you
did I just freeze? Did I just
yeah.
freeze?
So
okay. After knowing Lrh as well as you did, and having that that fierce devotion to him even much later in life, does it bother you when you see people attributing pedophilia to Lrh, that his writings indicated pedophilia or endorsed pedophilia, or pointing out the fact that people like you were his messengers? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that maybe people who never knew him or who were never Scientologists, it's very easy to take some of his writings and be able to get that out of it. Because when I read it, I don't even remember when I read Dianetics, to tell you the honest truth. But when I read that, that was kind of shocking to me. And that there was never any point in my whole experience with him that ever came across. In fact, it was, to me, the opposite. There was, but that's my own experience, and I can't talk for everybody, but I was in his, bedroom with him, helping him to get him dressed. And that wasn't like naked getting him dressed. it was putting on his socks, helping him put on his shoes. I mean, he was an older man. You know, when I was there, he was in his 60s already. And I was 13, 14, 15, you know, until I was 22. So to me, he was a much older man. And he wasn't necessarily in the best of health either. So to me, there was nothing that ever indicated to me that he had any of those whatever tendencies or thinking that it was okay. And I mean,
reported.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to run over you like that.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
I've seen it reported, and I just can't remember not who reported it, but who the information was being attributed to. Where when messengers say they helped him shower or they helped dress him or undress him, people automatically, and rightfully so, considering how the information is being delivered, assume that these young girls are in the presence of a naked Lrh Hubbard or something like this.
Definitely not. He also had a butler who was a man, and we also had a couple of male messengers. So if that was a situation where he had to go to, if he needed help in his bathroom, then it was definitely his butler or one of the male messengers. There was never a time that a female messenger, as far as I know, has ever seen him naked.
Right. Okay.
I mean, it was like this. He needed to go to bed, so we would go to his bedroom. Usually there were 2 or 3 of us. He would have his water. He would take his vitamins. He loved to read. He actually studied things like photography, or had photography books, or the new video camera book or manual or whatever. And he would sleep in his boxers, so he would have his boxers on and get into bed, and we'd make sure the light was on, that his water was there, that he had his books next to him, and that the pillows were right. You know, that was the kind of thing. It's kind of like, I never ever felt like there was anything more than that.
Right. One thing that gets pointed to as, I guess I'll just say, evidence of pedophilia or pedophile-friendly ideas or whatever, is this sentence in Dianetics that says, I think just isolated without the context, might say something almost exactly like, a 7-year-old girl should not shudder if kissed even passionately by a grown man, as having a pedophile-like meaning. What's your understanding of that sentence?
Well, I think he's trying to give an example of traumatic experience in the mind, not like in the future. If you handle it with proper Dianetic auditing, it shouldn't have an effect anymore. Like, so if the child had been sexually abused as a child, then as an adult, if it's been run out in the Dianetic auditing, that they wouldn't get affected by it anymore.
Right.
It wouldn't be like this traumatic experience.
Right. I've been directly told by certain people that this sentence means that if you are auditing a 7-year-old and you are having trouble finding important engrams to run, that a grown male auditor would be justified, per what Hubbard wrote in this sentence in Dianetics, in trying to passionately kiss his 7-year-old girl pre-clear to see if she shudders. And if she does shudder, then it's signs of an important engram that exists on this subject, and you should.
You stopped again. Okay, you stopped.
Find and erase. Okay, am I unfrozen?
But I get what you were saying.
No. I have to make sure that I finish. What's the last thing you heard me say?
That the auditor would have kissed the 7-year-old to see if she had any reaction.
Yes, and if she did, then you should go get rid of those engrams, because the 7-year-old should not object to being kissed. That's only an aberrative reaction. And I'm going to ask for your thoughts on that.
Okay, you stuck again. You stuck again. Aaron. Okay, we're stuck.
I point.
Sorry, you froze again, Aaron.
I know, that's okay. I've been waiting until I unfroze. I'm going to ask for your thoughts on that after I point out one thing. There's many things being missed about what that was really supposed to mean, but I think one of the most important things being missed is.
Okay.
Hold on. Am I unfrozen?
Yeah, you're fine.
This is why I don't do live streams. Anyway, you're not supposed to audit 7-year-olds on Dianetics. It would be almost impossible. That's the one thing I'm not sure I've ever had a chance to say publicly of why that interpretation of the sentence doesn't make sense. You don't audit young children on Dianetics.
Yeah, I would never have gotten that from that sentence, but being a Scientologist already and having grown up in it, that was definitely not what I would have gotten out of it. But maybe someone who's never been a Scientologist would read, into that way. But from my point of view, it's definitely not what that was meant by. And it was a horrible, stupid, example to have put in there.
Right, I agree. I do sometimes get accused of being an LRH apologist for not being willing to jump onto the dog pile for some of these more extreme criticisms. And if I thought they were true, I'd be happy to say they were true. I like to use the analogy, if someone says, Hitler killed 20 million Jews, and someone else jumps in and says, actually, it was closer to 6 million. That doesn't make you a Hitler apologist. It just makes you someone dedicated to having an honest conversation. And
Right.
So when I push back on this concept of L. Ron Hubbard being a pedophile, it's because I think you lose the conversation right away. Almost no one that I know in Scientology would ever, even after leaving Scientology, look back on some of these things and go, yeah, he was a pedophile. And yet there are some who do. And go ahead.
No, but if I just take one situation that happened on the ship where a young guy who was older than 18, so maybe he was 19 or 20, had sex with a young girl who was under 18. It was found out on the ship, and he was put in the chain locker for 48 hours or 72 hours in, which was the jail on the ship. And, and that was done by LRH. So if he was for pedophilia, that would have never happened. We actually had, during the time that I was on the Apollo and through my life in the Sea Org, I know that it was a bit looser in the early 70s before I got there, but we had very strict sexual rules. So I don't get, from my own experience, it was pretty much the opposite to what people have said, and it is a bit upsetting just because I don't have any reason to lie about that. But all I want to do is tell the truth about LRH, not all of these fantasies that people think.
Right. I want to stay on this for just a couple more minutes. One response I've seen is, because I go, do you know what pedophiles do? They fuck kids. And I see some people pointing to the fact that LRH was surrounded by young kids and surrounded by young girls. And, you know, there's a story that he once tried to kiss maybe Terry Gamboa when she was 16 or something like this. And I go, you're pointing to things that are supposed to indicate pedophile-like tendencies. But if he was a pedophile, you should be able to just point to kids he had sex with, not things that seem weird. Like I go, pedophiles have sex with kids. They don't surround themselves with kids and not have sex with them. Pedophiles have sex with kids. And then someone else said, well, no, a pedophile doesn't have to have sex with kids. They have to want to have sex with kids. And that's all we're saying. We're just saying he wanted to have sex with kids. And I was like,
well, I seriously think there would have been, oh, so now we have frozen again here.
okay.
So, yeah, there was plenty of opportunity for him to have had sex with us. I mean, I even saw once somebody made a comment that he thought that us messengers were all just brainwashed and we didn't even know that that we were being sexually abused.
Right. And let me, there's one thing that I have considered, which I think is an interesting argument or an interesting point, which is that if you are already a pedophile and you did read that chapter, that paragraph in Dianetics, and you already were someone who had a tendency or was predisposed to abusing children, that you could read that paragraph and it could justify to you why it was okay. And I think that's an interesting point. And also that if someone had been a victim of sexual abuse as a child and they read that paragraph, it could reinforce something that they're already struggling with, which is that they didn't have the right to say no. And I thought those were good points.
Yeah,
and I could get behind the idea that if you already had a reason to want to interpret those paragraphs that way, that's how those paragraphs would go in.
I agree too.
Yeah.
It's very it's terrible that was. I mean, I don't even know if David was going to redo all the books and whatever he did, take out the semicolons or whatever, why he didn't just take that out, I don't know.
Yeah.
Boggles my mind.
And another point that I'd like to get your thoughts on, because this is another point that I thought was valid, if it's interpreted through a certain lens, and that is the concept that existed in the Sea Org, specifically, I think the Sea Org, but possibly more generally in Scientology, that children are just thetans in small bodies, right? There are no child thetans, there are no adult thetans, we're all the same. And that a child is just a thetan with a small body. Now, I never processed that information while being in Scientology as justifying having sex with children. But do you think it's possible that that is how some people process that? It's not a policy, it's a belief that we're all just, kids are just thetans in small bodies. Could that be used to justify pedophilia?
Well, no. Nobody that I ever knew in Scientology as Scientologists or Sea Org would have ever thought that. However, if someone was already a pedophiliac person, then maybe they could have had that justification, but I've never seriously known that or thought about it or anything. No, and no one's ever discussed that with me.
Right. The reason I thought those were interesting points is because it shows it doesn't have to be an all true or all false proposition. We can argue over the words that he wrote. We can argue over what he felt when he wrote them. We can argue over how his words can be interpreted by others. All these things could be different conversations. But by acknowledging that pedophiles or victims of pedophiles would be impacted or hurt or affected by these words differently than people who had no experience in either of those areas. It just shows that people are going to process this information differently. People are going to respond to it differently. And it doesn't have to be that one group is all right and the other group is all wrong. It kind of depends on one's experience.
Right. Totally. I agree.
And I guess we could argue all day long over what Hubbard actually felt, but how the hell do we know that? All right, I'll stop taking over the interview. All right, let's see. We have some more here.
I think donation.
Can you go into what's that?
I think the next one was to do with donations or.
What? Well, there's a few here. We asked the religion one. We asked that one. All right. Can you go into details about what happened during the last week of Lrh's life? You've been a messenger. Is that correct? Were you? But you weren't with Lrh during the last weeks of his life.
No. The last time I saw him was in 1980.
Okay.
And he wasn't in good shape physically.
Right. Some of these questions just aren't really questions, so I'm just going to go on past. Some of these questions I feel like have already been answered, so I don't want to re-ask them just for the hell of it. Oh, this must be the one you were talking about. I'm curious about how donations are handled, the difference between when Lrh was running it and now Miscavige is running it. As a never-in and someone who worked in the mental health field for years, I just want to say that your story touched my heart. Okay, it just doesn't. It says some very nice stuff. It's just not a question. So what does that mean here? How donations are handled, the difference between when Lrh was running it and now that Miscavige is running it?
Well, I think the biggest thing that they're talking about are all these donations for buildings and for the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists, where you just donate money and it goes into this fund and whatever they do with it, they do with it. So that didn't exist when I was there. That was started after I left, and there had never been anything to do with donations other than if a person bought a course or they bought auditing or they bought books. And that was it. Never, ever, ever. I suppose some rich Scientologist could say, hey, I want to donate some money, but I actually never even heard of that. So he never pushed for that. And that will then go into these ideal orgs, which is something that I think he would be turning in his grave about as well. He specifically had things where he didn't like to have like big, what was it that he called like raffles, or he wrote stuff that I actually found all that stuff because I was going to confront my sons with this, because that was one of the biggest things that just I couldn't believe when I got back in, was all of this donation stuff. It absolutely pissed me off, and I don't even know how to explain it. In fact, he hated events. Lrh hated events. He knew that they had to be done for like Auditors Day. He couldn't stand the fact that they celebrated his birthday even though
really.
Yeah, even though he did make a big thing about his birthday and, the prices were going to go up or whatever. I think we had some campaign like that, but it wasn't his big thing, he wanted to be source and he wanted to be the guy over this, but it wasn't, at the same time, he didn't enjoy like people standing up and clapping and making a big deal either. So kind of a bit of a dichotomy there.
Interesting. That might be, it's another explanation I hadn't considered before, that it kind of serves as evidence that it wasn't just about the money, that he did believe what he was doing. Because even if you take that quote, the real way to get rich is to start a religion. Well, Miscavige has really capitalized on that. He doesn't even have to sell Scientology services anymore. He just asks for money. Whereas there actually was a policy letter called correct me if I'm wrong, solve it with Scientology, handle it with Scientology, that you do not ask for donations. You just sell and deliver more Scientology.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Now,
And
and
this
so
was
on the one
very,
hand, you'd be like, well, yeah, but he was selling and delivering Scientology to make money. True. But Miscavige has taken it to the next level of he's not even trying to sell and deliver Scientology. He's just asking for money.
right. And the other thing was that when he would look at the stats, okay, the GI or the gross income was important to him, but he also looked at the VSD, which was value of services delivered. And he would get very upset if there was a gap between those two in terms of getting a lot of money in, but then the services delivered was not following suit after, which meant that people were putting money on account and were not actually using it for their services. And from a management point of view, he was very focused on that. Like it was important to get the people to come in and get their services, or else what is the point of it?
Yeah. Do you still believe in various aspects of Scientology? Do you believe in the reactive mind? Do you believe we're all thetans? Do you believe Earth is a prison planet? Things like that?
All I'll say is that I'm a work in progress. One has to understand that when you get to the age of 57 and you've had this ingrained in you all your life, it's very hard to just get rid of it overnight. So it's, I do like to think of myself as a spiritual being, that, that my body is not just it. It's very hard for me to just accept that. So I'm definitely a work in progress.
Totally understood. What was the question I wanted to ask you specifically? But here's why it occurred to me to ask you that question, because you've never gotten involved in independent Scientology, and it seems to me that if someone leaves Scientology but they still believe it, then they still believe that we, Thetans with native godlike powers, that we're burdened down by not only our reactive minds, but later on just our case and I guess body Thetans and Thetan clusters and shit. And that without getting rid of those things, you can never be free from the trap of being stuck in bodies and getting amnesia after you die every lifetime. And so that if you leave Scientology, but you still believe those things, and therefore you still believe auditing is the only hope, that someone would do independent Scientology, and yet you have not. So maybe I should ask you, why didn't you ever do independent Scientology?
Well, first of all, I would never have done that because I had gotten through my declare in the early 80s and I wanted to keep my relationship with my parents and my family. So I would never have gone to a squirrel group as independent Scientologists. Secondly, that is the thing that I'm trying to come to grips with, because I personally feel that to me, it wasn't, especially when I did finish OT3, that I had no more desire to, and I keep thinking, like,
I think it
did I
froze for a bit. I'm not sure if
sorry,
it froze for everyone else, but you said after you finished OT3, you had no desire to do more. Is that what you said?
right. And I'm not sure it, like, I really started doubting everything. And I didn't feel, so there's been a lot of doubt anyway for me over all this time. And I hated actually going to have auditing. I actually hated it. And it was very hard for me to just even admit that. It was,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I always felt like a bit of a black sheep when I was in Scientology and in the Sea Org, knowing how much I hated auditing.
yeah.
And I'm like, I've literally dedicated my life to working for the church as a Sea Org member, and I fucking hated getting auditing. It's so weird to look back on it and see how I was able to keep going anyway.
Yeah, and I remember my mother passed away in 1997, and it was the year before we came to the US. She died of brain cancer. She was only 58 at the time, which was just the most shocking thing to me ever. And that was another time when I got to the point of, my God, here she had dedicated her life to Scientology, and what did she get? She got this. But anyway, I was devastated. And afterwards, they always, you know, my siblings and people from the org were like, you got to come in and have auditing. But you see, I couldn't really get any auditing because I was already OT3 and they didn't have an advanced org there. But they would have sent somebody from EU or somewhere to do that for the people in the family who were. And I was just like, you know, I wanted to experience my grief. That's what I couldn't, like, I really didn't understand. Like, okay, so right now I'm in this grief and I'm mourning my mom, and then I have to go in session and think of past times that I've had similar things. And, you know, I just wanted to spend the next few months grieving my mother and cry when I wanted to. So it was just another time when I started thinking, you know what, I don't know. I don't know about this. It's really
Right. When when you knew Lrh and were close to him, my actual question here has to do with your understanding of and belief in the state of full operating Thetan, and whether it was ever a conflict for you, reading everything Hubbard says this state was supposed to be about. Kind of, I'm trying to think now if he ever actually said this, but I always had the impression that he was claiming to have this state. Otherwise, how would he even know it exists? But then seeing him in real life and seeing you don't seem to be this full OT thing that you talk about. Is this something that ever kind of jumped around in your head when you were with him?
It was kind of like this dirty little secret. And I don't know if the other messengers had the same thing, but we never spoke to other people about him. And like Gary, my husband, was on the ship even earlier than me. So, and he was in Lrh external comm, where he actually was responsible for typing his telexes. He would come to the house to pick up the telexes and then go back to his office and type and code and send them. So he had all this time, 11 years of being around Lrh, and he spoke to him most probably 3 times. So the messengers and Kima Douglas, who was part of the household unit, the head of the household unit, and of course Mary Sue, were the closest people to him, and David Mayo. And it was just this thing that we, and I think this is why I never spoke up for 30 years, was you just had this strong allegiance to him that there was no way you would ever tell anybody. So even though I would come off watch at 2 o'clock in the morning and I was distraught because he had been so angry, and it was just like, I couldn't talk to Gary about it. Like I couldn't actually open up to him and say, you know, I think he's nuts, or how can he be OT? And we didn't even talk amongst each other, us messengers, like that. Even if it was on watch together, we would just deal with the problem, and then like you wouldn't really talk about it. Like we wouldn't complain. We wouldn't natter to each other about it at all. So I think it was kind of like a dirty little secret. And I used to think, like, how is it that he can be this great man, but he can be so screwed up?
Right. So it didn't actually cause you to doubt the truth of Scientology, or did it at that time?
Well, I think the way that we would justify it is that there was all these suppressive things being done to him, you know, like the FBI and the CIA, and then people that were attacking him, and lawsuits, that the suppression was so intense that it was harming him. That's how I think we justified it.
So he was going PTS.
Yes. And
the government of the world.
Right. And I think that's why there was so much emphasis put on the suppression policy and PTSness after we left. Because if you think about it, all these people that were so close to him were all declared suppressive people. And how can that be? I used to think that. I used to think, you know, like, how can all these people be suppressive? I actually used to tell my sons that.
Right. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. That was a great question. Comment. Do you think human trafficking is a problem with Scientology? I sometimes wonder how many children have been born into the church who haven't been accounted by the government with social security numbers like the FLDS.
No, I don't think there's a situation like that. I mean, if a first of all, babies are not being born in the Sea Org, so
yeah. No, I think this question. See, the problem is that human trafficking is it's a loaded word and it's a legal word. There is a sense in which the Church of Scientology engages in human trafficking, but the way this word is used colloquially or just socially is like, you know, smuggling people, or the child sex industry, or not even child sex, the prostitution industry. You know, bringing people over and then forcing them to work as in the sex trade or something like that. That's the way most people think of the word human trafficking, at least in my opinion. But just my 2 cents on where the human trafficking does occur by definition is when they're recruiting these poor people from you know, rural Russia and Venezuela.
Yes.
When they bring them over with the promise of, you know, living in the great US of A, and we're going to get you a visa, we're going to bring you over, you're basically going to live the American dream, and then they get to flag and they take away their visas, and they don't have bank accounts, and they don't have driver's licenses, and they don't have the ability to leave because they don't have money and they don't have their visas. That is human trafficking. The only caveat being I'm not a lawyer, so if there's something wrong about what I just said, please correct me in the comments below. But I do believe that is the definition of human trafficking. I'm just not sure that's what Liz Young is referring to in her question. All right. Is there anything else you wanted to say on that subject?
No, I mean, I agree with you. It's definitely seems to be more of a thing than what it was when I was in.
Right. Okay, we're almost done with these questions here. Comment. Does Lois think that Lrh was really believing the stuff he wrote? Okay, so we've already answered that.
Yeah.
So how has anything changed for you in your life before the TV show and after the TV show, in pretty much any respect, in terms of harassment, fair game stuff, or any other answer to the question?
No, we haven't had anything really happen. We just had the whole situation with Brandon's court case and everything, which, you know, that's in the past. The only thing we had was when the San Diego Ideal Org opened last year, we had our video camera picked up a private investigator checking us out and following Brandon to the shopping center and back, which is just up the road. But that's the only thing that, and then we've had, you know, hate websites put up on us and stuff.
So, how much did that bother you, if at all, the hate website that they put up?
You know,
go ahead.
I think it bothered me with one of my sisters, because 2 of my sisters did a video on me and Craig. Craig's was kind of stupid. The one sister doesn't know anything. She's been in Hammett at Int Base since 1980. So for her to say anything is ridiculous because she hasn't been around for almost 40 years. But I think the one that really bothered me the most was my youngest sister. She was just so, she's the one who actually runs the mission in Johannesburg. It was just so hateful that it shocked me. You know, I actually had a pretty good relationship with her, and but at the same time, I know that they're being told to do this, and she had just finished OT8. She is under the gun herself, that she knew that if she didn't do it properly, she was going to be in trouble and most probably have to go to the ship, the Free Winds or Flag, to go and get, you know, so I understand it. And all I can do is just give them all a lot of love, because so I'll open my doors.
Both of your sisters are still in Scientology?
Well, I've got 3 sisters 4 sisters and a brother who
Oh,
are in. Yeah.
which sisters are still in?
So I've got Dion, Jerry. Jerry is the one who's been in the Sea Org since 1981. I've got Doran and my brother Scott.
And which 2 are still in?
They're all in.
Oh, shit.
So it's, yeah, Dion, Jerry, Doran, Scott, and Levin. So there's 5 of them.
So even the other sisters that were with LRH on the ship with you during that whole time.
Oh no, they didn't. It was just me.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I had it all wrong.
Yeah, I was alone on the ship. I didn't have any family.
No, but I thought that okay, later on when the Watchdog Committee was formed, were any of the sisters on the Watchdog Committee?
So 1980, Dion and Jerry joined the Sea Org and were at Int with me just months before I was busted. And then Dion left the Sea Org maybe a year later, but Jerry stayed in the whole time.
Wow.
They had never met Lrh.
Incredible.
Yeah.
It is incredible to me that they would have a family member that they knew LRH so well and spent so much time with him. You're like one of the most valuable sources of information on the subject of who LRH was and what he was like, and they'd rather just believe David Miscavige. It really does blow my fucking mind sometimes.
Well, I'll quickly tell you a quick story. I was at AOLA during my sec checking time, and they had come out those photographic leather-bound books of Lrh photography throughout his life, of photos he had taken. And so I started talking to the bookstore person there at the front. I was just in between sessions or whatever. And I pulled out the one that was during the years that I was with him, and I opened it up, and there was certain photos that I was actually with Lrh, and I started telling her the story. The next minute, you know, there were 10 to 12 Sea Org staff members around me because I was telling these stories. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, you know, here I am. I mean, they were just lapping it up. The CEO or some exec came by and just basically stopped the whole thing. And I thought, wow.
It's incredible. In any other group, I don't know. I don't even know what kind of group I'm talking about. In any other group where there's some central figure that has driven the whole thing and a lot of time has gone by, it would make sense for people to, in a way, revere those who knew that person the best. Right. Whereas in the Church of Scientology, they specifically try to exclude and push to the edges the people who knew L. Ron Hubbard the best. And I think that's some of the best evidence of that they know it's all bullshit. No, but here's the thing. It's not that Scientologists know it's all bullshit. David Miscavige knows it's all bullshit, or he wouldn't be trying to get rid of the people who knew L. Ron Hubbard the best.
You see, he when Lrh died, he was able to have access to everything. He got involved with all those lawsuits where it was uncovering all this early life stuff. And I think if he had read and he knew all of that stuff, he had to know that it was bullshit. And the evidence was there, so he has to know he's not doing it himself as far as we know, and he's focused on all this donations and money and buildings. To me, it's just absolute proof.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've made it through all the questions, and we could probably talk for 10 more hours. But let's cut it off here for now. What do you say?
Yeah, well, it was just great, Aaron. Thanks for letting me speak, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if they have any more questions, they can post them on the Facebook site, and then I will start answering any other questions that they have after they've listened to this, you know.
Okay, great. And just so you know how I did it, because this is a YouTube live stream, I put the link in the Facebook groups but they can actually, it might be even easier if they put their questions in the comment section of this video on YouTube. But either way, so basically you'll answer questions in the supporters of Leah Remini Facebook group. And if you see comments in the thread of the video on YouTube, feel free to jump in and answer those as well. Or maybe we'll just do another video to answer all of them, whichever you prefer.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to say that, if you know, Janice Gilliam Grady has written a great book about the Sea Org and her life with L. Ron Hubbard called Commodore's Messenger. And I really think that if someone's interested, from what I've been talking about, it's a good book to read, plus the new one that's going to be coming out, which will cover the time period that I was there with him. So anyway, a lot of stuff people can read.
Great. Yeah, it might have cut out when you said her name, but Janice Gilliam Grady, Commodore's Messenger's book, it's fantastic. And the photographs in the book are incredible.
I know. She's like a walking encyclopedia.
I just got to meet Janice in person for the first time last week. We went on the cruise to the Bahamas with her and a bunch of other people. Got to meet her and her husband. Fantastic. It was so great to meet them.
Yeah, she's a very special person too. So sometimes we get together and it's like Gail, Dee Dee, me, Janice, Terry. You know, those are 5 messengers right there who had all this experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks
Leave any questions or comments.
Bye. See you all later. Bye.
Have a great day.
You too.